Welcome to the End of the Road podcast. This week we take you back to when shipping was the only way to luxuriously travel across the Great Lakes. We look at cruise ship travel from the mid-1800s until its near end, in the 1950s. Now that cruising the Great Lakes is making a comeback, this is a story you might want to hear before you venture out. Each week, we select one, from several hundred, stories about the Great Lakes region and the tip of Michigan's thumb. These are taken from thumbwind.com and presented here so that you can listen to it anytime, anywhere. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's story from the end of the road. The luxurious times of Great Lakes cruising history. I'll admit that I've taken a liking to cruising. It must be the influence of having a sailboat that we have taken from port to port on Lake Huron. It appears that Great Lakes cruising is making a healthy comeback. Recently several cruise ships have announced routes and stops throughout the Great Lakes region. Currently, there are over 3 cruise lines that cover the Great Lakes. Victory Cruise Lines, Great Lakes Cruise Company, and Blunt Small Ship Adventures, and more are on their way in the years ahead. One line, the Great Lakes Cruise Company has 4 ships that cover a wide range of ports and destinations. One ship, the Pearl Mist, is small enough to tackle the famous cruising grounds of Georgian Bay and the beautiful North Channel. Prior to the railroads and highways being built in Michigan, the only quick way to travel between any major Michigan port town, Chicago, Detroit and Bay City was by steamer. Cruising was the primary way to travel in the 1800s. In the days before the highway and autos, the only way to travel the vast distances on the Great Lakes was by sail and steamer. In the mid-1800s, until well into the 1950s, one could travel most of the lakes in style and comfort. One of the most famous and beloved ships was the SS South American. The SS South American was a Great Lakes overnight passage steamboat, built by the Great Lakes Engineering Works in Ecorse, Michigan. It was built in 1913 for the Chicago, Duluth, and Georgian Bay Transit Company. The vessel was launched on February 21, 1914, and was the newer of 2 sister ships, the older one being the SS North American. Along with its sister ship, SS North American carried passengers between Chicago, Mackinac Island, Sault Ste. Marie, Duluth, Georgian Bay, Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo. These were considered the heydays of cruising in the northern Great Lakes. A businessman could board a ship in Chicago for an overnight trip to northern Michigan, spend the weekend with the family in the cool northern cabin in the woods, and take the ship back to the city on Sunday night and arrive rested for work in the city on Monday morning. It was noted that the famous Michigan author, Ernest Hemingway's father, did just that, early in the 1900s. It was a common occurrence for the 1800s ship-traveling public. Only the SS South American visited Lake Superior, and the ship made a short weekly stop in Michigan's Upper Peninsula town of Houghton, Hancock. She carried over 450 passengers. A picture of the fabled ship hangs in the Rock Harbor Lodge on Isle Royal. It shows tourists being dropped off at the American dock, which still stands today. Great Lakes cruising was a tradition. The SS South American was well known for its high school trips in the 1950s. As a rite of passage, Southeast Michigan high school students in their senior year would take a small cruise from Detroit to Chicago. The last season for the South American was in 1967. Her final route was to offer trips to the 1967 World's Fair in Montreal. Sadly, both ships are now part of history. The SS North American sunk on the Atlantic coast while being towed, and the SS South American rotted away and was finally scrapped in 1992. However, with the rapid popularity of cruising now taking place, I expect to see more of these small cruising ships ply their way among the Great Lakes. The birth of the term, going up north. By the late 1800s, travel by steamship has gotten luxurious. Ship traffic was at its peak in the 1870s, with what one historian described as a freeway of passenger and freighter traffic moving in and out of Saginaw Bay. Steamship service on Saginaw Bay. The steamer Charles W. Lycan, was built as a tug in 1880, in Bay City by the West Bay City Shipbuilding Company. It was listed as 63-foot long, 38-ton, 36-horsepower ship. It lists its home port as Bay City in 1881, then moved to Seberwing in 1883. With a draft of only 5 feet, it was an ideal craft for 1800s ship travel and the shallow ports along Saginaw Bay. It was transformed from a tug to a passenger steamer in 1898. The craft had 2 decks and carried passengers and mail. The end of the C.W. Lycan. While details are sketchy, the C.W. Lycan operated for 7 years as a passenger and mail courier. In 1904, it was rebuilt and listed for sale. On August 13, 1905, the C.W. Lycan burned to the waterline in the Saginaw River in Bay City, and declared a total loss. The ship was officially removed from registered service on August 15, 1905. The Steamship Company ships serving Saginaw Bay and Michigan's Thumb. Between 1830 and 1910 there were hundreds of ships plying the Great Lakes hauling passengers and freight. Here are some notable transport lines of Great Lakes cruising history and the ships that served the Saginaw Bay and Great Lakes region. These included the Northern Steamship Company, Graham and Morton Transportation Company, and the Detroit and Cleveland Steam Navigation Company. The amazing story of the Great Lakes ship travel with the Star Line. The Star Line had been in operation since the 1870s. In 1883, A.N. Moffett brought a 55% controlling interest in the tug line, and took over established passenger service between Detroit and Port Huron. This was a competitive route. During one season in 1800s ship travel, a rate war commenced between the Star Line and its competitor, the Cole and Grummond Line. One-way fares dropped from 75 to 15 cents, and the competition extended to how fast each could complete the river run. The River War lasted until a truce was called between the companies, and rates returned to normal for the rest of the season. Ultimately, the Star Line hit hard times, forcing its general manager and majority owner, A.N. Moffett, into retirement. Declining revenues enabled Moffett's company to be taken over by the White Star Line. The Star Line ships included the Milton D. Ward, built 1870 in Marine City, at 182 feet, 500 horsepower. Robert J. Holland, built 1872 Marine City, listed as 156 feet. The Evening Star, built in 1866, in East Saginaw at 168 feet. And finally, the Saginaw Valley, built in 1881. Saginaw, at an impressive 181 feet in length at the waterline. The Cleveland and Saginaw Transportation Company was headquartered in East Saginaw. This line offered transport of passengers and freight from Bay City and Saginaw to Goodrich, Ontario, Sand Beach, Port Hope, Grindstone City, Port Austin, Caseville, East Tawas, Tawas City, and Alabasda, Ontario. The firm offered Great Lakes ship travel with modern ships with upper-deck sleeper cabins. The Cleveland and Saginaw transportation ships were the Jacob Birchie, the Keweenaw, the Benton and the St. Joseph. Passenger cabin accommodations aboard a Great Lakes steamships ranged from exquisitely appointed to basic. About 50 cruise steamers sailed on the Great Lakes before World War II. These large, luxurious ships have about 8 elegant parlors, or staterooms, with double beds and private baths, all finished in paneling, brass lanterns, and gingerbread trim. The remaining 70 to 100 rooms were with a simple double bunk bed, maybe a chair, and a small cabinet. Those with windows, or portholes corresponded with the second class. Inside cabins, without portholes, might be described as third class, although these designations were not used. There is a reconstruction of the 1800s ship travel accommodations and cruising history in the Duluth Maritime Museum. The display is based on the accommodations in the Canadian steamer Keewatin, which survives today as a museum. So, if you get the opportunity to travel in today's smaller cruise ships in the Great Lakes, be thankful that the steamship days are long gone. The amenities, comfortable accommodations, safety, and service of today's cruise ships are much improved over those in the 1800s. This concludes this week's story. We hoped you enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Thumbwin's End of the Road podcast. If you like this kind of story, you are invited to join our 15,000 other monthly visitors on our website at thumbwin.com. Please watch for and download next week's story and take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and give us a review. Have a great day.